A lot.
Almost every day.
Quite often. I don't know, I'd say twice a week. Yeah.
Probably like 3 or 4 times a week. All the time.
Yeah, like every day. Yeah.
Say Burrito Loco, McDonald's, Mesa, kind of everything around here. Mesa.
Potbelly, we're in town. Like Subway, and I like Jim Jones.
Yeah, like the library.
We just ate at Annie's Parlor, and that's one of our favorites.
Oh, not. Definitely not.
Not specifically. No. Not really. It's rarely.
Sometimes. Food when you
Absolutely, I'm the most fit.
No. Not really. No.
Never crossed my mind. Not really.
Not really?
When we eat, we want to indulge.
10, 15 milligrams a day.
Any idea?
Not.
No guess?
I have no idea. No idea. Yeah.
Put a guess. In grams?
2,000 milligrams?
No idea.
300 milligrams? No idea.
Not at all. Do you have a guess? In milligrams of what the dietary guidelines is?
Yes. No, I don't want to sound stupid on camera.
Probably more.
Yeah.
Probably more. Too much. More.
I don't know. What we write on? More.
Oh, probably more.
I feel like people consume a lot more than they think.
So sodium intake in the United States has been rising for a long period of time. It hit a peak in the early 1900s when, probably a few thousand years ago, the Chinese discovered that it was used as, or could be used as a salt preservative. In that time span, sodium around the world has kind of exploded as a food additive. Up until the early 1900s, it was kind of one of the only ways to preserve food. So based on that, comparing to what our kind of ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago ate is exponential as far as the amount. So 100,000 years ago, you're looking at maybe 1,000 milligrams per day. Now today, you're looking at anywhere between 5 and 10,000 milligrams per day for kind of the average person in the developed world. So it's certainly more than what we need. Sodium is something that we certainly need in the diet, but it's currently at levels that are way beyond what we need for normal kind of physiological functioning.
High blood pressure.
Heart disease.
Yeah?
And obesity. And that's all I got right now.
Yeah, water retention for sure, and probably increased blood pressure.
High blood pressure,
High blood pressure for sure.
I know there are consequences, but I don't know exactly.
So the primary health risk that most people are somewhat aware of is high blood pressure or hypertension. That is a huge risk factor for stroke and coronary artery disease, and is probably beyond malnutrition in kids is probably the second leading cause of disability and death in the world. Most people aren't really aware of that. So it's something that a higher sodium intake, anything above a couple thousand milligrams per day, you start to see increases in blood pressure, and that's probably the main concern that most people should have with sodium intake. Other health conditions, asthma can be made worse by a higher sodium intake. Doesn't necessarily cause it, but it can exacerbate the symptoms. Stomach cancer is a cancer that foods that are preserved in lots of salt has been linked to stomach cancer. And then the last, obesity, people don't really think about, but as your salt intake goes up, people tend to drink more fluids, and if those fluids come in the form of something that's a sweetened beverage or a sugary beverage, it can have some sort of impact on the development of obesity or being overweight, although it's not, I wouldn't say, a real huge contributor.
Yeah, not at all.
Probably a 1.
7.
Probably 5.
Not at all. Not concerned. Really concerned.
You really concerned? Yeah.
6.
Yeah, maybe like 6 and like growing.
After these questions.
Yeah.
So it's important for college-age students because it's a lot easier to change their habits now than to wait until they're 40 and 50. And by the time they start to change their habits later on in life, a lot of the damage has already been done. Heart disease or coronary artery disease is something that you can somewhat reverse with lifestyle changes later on in life, but a lot of the damage has already been done to that point in time. If you wait until you're 40 or 50 to try and undo some of that damage, you're going to have to make some really drastic lifestyle changes. So I think starting now, it would be a lot easier to do that. Another portion is the first symptom of heart disease or stroke oftentimes is a heart attack or acute stroke. And that's, in a quarter of people who have these conditions, that's the first symptom they have. And a lot of them end up being dead. So it's something that I think to be aware of early on and addressed earlier on in life, I think is more beneficial.
Sometimes. It depends on what age. Like,
Yeah? Do you add it before or after tasting it?
After.
After?
No, not really.
Well, with some, but very little.
Most people think they're getting all their sodium from putting it on their foods, but probably 2/3 to 3/4 of their sodium is coming from food, from sodium that's already present within the food even before they put any extra salt on it.
The Big Mac? Why? The bacon? Because bacon has sodium in it?
The Big Mac. Because this one has the bacon on it.
I would say maybe the Big Mac. Probably the Big Mac.
You're right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Probably gonna go with the burrito.
Quesadilla. Yeah.
Oh no!
1 for 2?
We're gonna go with the sandwich.
Oh, the salad will have more.
Probably the classic sandwich because I feel like there's gonna be more sodium in the dressing with the salad. The bruschetta chicken salad. No!
Nope, I was wrong. The bruschetta chicken salad's higher.
The buffalo because barbecue has a lot of sugar in it too.
Maybe the classic ones, because I feel like barbecue is really high in sodium.
Got 3 times.
Yeah. I would have thought they'd be that much different, but.
Wow, okay, I did not think that.
Never mind.
Holy shit!
No way.
Oh, you guys are filming, I'm sorry.
Chili.
This lower.
Yep.
I'm willing to say the soup will have more salt.
This one has the least amount.
I think so.
Probably the chili.
That one. Oh my god.
Okay. Not even close.
So sodium intake, probably the number one tip that I would give people as a registered dietitian is to, number one, stop eating out as much as you already are. Not to completely eliminate eating out, but that's probably the primary source, or one of the primary sources where people get a lot of their sodium is from eating out. And it's different because a lot of restaurants now will offer at least low calorie or other options that are quote unquote healthier, but very few restaurants at this point in time really make a concerted effort to offer a lot of options that are low sodium. And in that environment, you really have no option as far as how you control how much sodium is going to be in your food beyond asking them to not use any salt, which even so, there's probably still going to be a significant amount there. The other portion is if you're eating at home, I would say look at the back of the food label. Looking at the front of the food can be a little bit confusing for consumers because it'll say reduced sodium, lower sodium, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's low in sodium. So something that's already high in sodium, even if it's reduced by 25%, can still be a pretty significant source of sodium. So then looking at the back of the label, you might want to look for less than 300, less than 200 milligrams per serving. That's kind of a general guideline of where to start with sodium intake when you're looking at individual foods. So beyond that, people can use other salt substitutes if they don't like, if they really want to be using kind of something on the table as far as flavoring their food. If they really want that salt flavor, you could use a potassium type salt substitute, which has the opposite effect of sodium on blood pressure. It actually lowers blood pressure. So that could be an option. Beyond that, using cooking spices and herbs. And it's just a matter of kind of experimenting with that, being sure that you're using one that doesn't have any salt in it. So things like garlic salt, onion salt still have salt in them or sodium in them. So being aware that there are products out there. Mrs. Dash is one that's a pretty popular one.